You are listening to African Father in America podcast by Simon Javanokelo, live from Seattle, Washington, USA.
Thank you so much for joining me for an amazing session of the Daily African Proverbs. We are live here on YouTube, but we're also live on Clubhouse. For those who don't know about Clubhouse, Clubhouse is a social audio platform that allows you to have, very intimate conversations. It's almost like you're having a phone call, but with a group of people. It's almost like a Zoom, but just for audio. So today I'm also joined by an amazing guest and wonderful spiritual leader, Gogo Rutendo Ngara, who is joining us from South Africa. And for those who are just joining us for the first time, the Daily African Proverbs is the name of this show, and we've been doing this since January 2021. And our hope with this show is that we share African proverbs, we dissect these proverbs, and we sit as if we are around the village fire, and we learn from these proverbs, and the hope is that by the end of our time together, you gain some African wisdom that you can take with you into your day or night, depending on where you are in the world. So whenever I have Gogo Rutendo Ngara, I just sit back, grab my cup of coffee, and learn. So today, Gogo Rutendo Ngara is just going to share with us briefly, how you're doing, and also your interpretation of today's wonderful proverb from Sudan. Our proverb from Sudan says that an empty stomachs have no ears. I'm going to pin it at the top of the room on Clubhouse in just a moment, but it says empty stomachs have no ears. And I see that Sister Aduoa has joined us on YouTube. Thank you very much. Your presence is truly, truly appreciated. Gogo, how are you? And what comes to your mind when you see this proverb from Sudan?
Hello, Simon. Thank you so much for taking us to Sudan today. And what comes to mind is that I'm not belly full at the moment, but I'm not hungry, and I'm very grateful for the fact that I'm not hungry. It's something that I give gratitude for every day. And as I was reflecting on the proverb, I reflect the fact how wisdom keeps tell us that the universe is inherently patterned, and that they observed the patterns, and then they observed how these patterns filter into all layers and spheres of existence. And then these patterns then filter into our everyday contemporary expressions. Now, today we're obviously looking at a proverb from Sudan, but let's look at some of the expressions about the stomach that that we use every day, even if we don't use the proverb. So we can say that Simon's got guts to do this podcast every day, every weekday, but he probably did this because his gut told him to. Perhaps, Simon, your gut told you to do this. There was something in your gut, so you had a gut feeling about something. There was something that you could feel in your gut, and maybe it was because there was something you couldn't stomach anymore. But then because you couldn't stomach whatever that was, you had then the stomach for creating this podcast. So we can see that the stomach and the gut has filtered into our everyday expressions, and usually it talks about intuition. It talks about being able to handle something, usually talks about courage. So all of these are intertwined in these everyday expressions when we speak about the stomach. And what's really interesting is I'll give some quotes from the Western world, and a very famous physicist and a very famous chemist. And the famous physicist, of course, is Albert Einstein, and who we know for the theory of relativity. And he said, an empty stomach is not a good political advisor. So what does that mean? An empty stomach is not a good political advisor. And where did he draw his knowledge from this? Because it seems that there's something about it that speaks to our proverb today. And then when we speak of the Nobel Peace Prize, we speak about Albert Nobel, who is a Swedish chemist and a philanthropist. And he had a quote, which is that words poison. So we're talking about political advisors, we're talking about worry, we're talking about poison, and all of this is related to that thing that we call the stomach or the gut. But we also have, contemporary expressions about the ear, So sometimes we say all ears, or you can give somebody an earful, or you can lend an ear, or you can play it by ear, or you can say that is music to my ears, or you can say the walls have ears, or you can say I'm wet behind the ears. And when we see these everyday, expressions, even in the English language, we can see how much, we can see in terms of synergies and drawing from some of these ancient sayings that we get in our African, proverbs. So when you're all ears, it means that you're listening intently. You're giving your full attention to everyone. So, and it's interesting. Why say all ears when we only have two? So what is it about that saying that implies that maybe we have other ways of hearing besides these two organs that are on the side of the head? But when you give somebody an earful, that's a different situation. That is when you're really reprimanding them. That is when you're really making your point, but you are allowing that point to go into that auditory canal, where it finally reaches, the brain, and it has an impact, through going through the cochlea and, going through all of that, until it is full. And you've actually made your point as it relates to whatever it is you want to get across. But then I'm all ears, once again, is the listening intently and then lending an ear. What does it mean when you lend an ear? And so that has got a slight different nuance to being all ears, but it's inherent in it is compassion. Inherent in it is presence. Inherent in it is the ability to allow somebody to acknowledge them, to see them, even if you're seeing them with an ear. So it's almost like you're giving them your ear so that they can use it to outpour whatever it is that they need to at that particular time. But then you also have playing it by ear, where if you play it by ear, then, you might have made a plan, a foolproof plan, but that there are all sorts of things that happen even with the foolproof plan. We're often told that planning is for beginners. The ability to survive what happens is, the true genius. And when you do this, you play it by ear. You see what the circumstances are. You listen out. You hearken, and then you say, because situation is shifting and changing in this particular way, then we're going to shift our direction in this particular way. So you play it by the ear. It implies a flexibility. It implies agility. But then when it's music to your ears, it's a completely different meaning. When it's music to your ears, it's something that's so sweet, something that resonates with you. So it then brings in a resonance, vibration, but it brings in the melody of vibration. So it becomes music. When you hear something that that really resonates with you, that you totally agree with, that really makes your day, it becomes music to your ears. But then also the walls may have ears, and what do we mean when we say that the walls have ears? And when the walls have ears, it means don't talk too loud, because there are all sorts of spies, there are all sorts of people listening in, wanting to hear things that and implied in the walls have ears is implied that whatever is heard can be used against you. Whatever is heard, may be revealing, certain things that are best kept, undercover. And then, of course, wet behind the ears. It implies that somebody is naive. They're not an expert. They're inexperienced. They haven't learned how to use their towel to wipe behind their ears. As a child. So we realize that even something like an ancient African proverb, when we even come into a contemporary language and understand the patterns of the universe and how it is used in everyday expressions, we're starting to maybe get a hint into what our proverb today is talking about. Now, when we go back to the stomach, we're talking about the health of the digestive system. And the health of the digestive system is considered the cornerstone of healing, especially in indigenous medical paradigms, and whether it is our African medical paradigm. But even let me take a trip across the borders from where I am and across the seas, and go to China. And of course, here we're talking about African wisdom. So why would I speak about, from a Chinese perspective when we're here talking about Africa? But it's Black History Month. And because it is Black History Month, I would really urge, everybody on this platform to perhaps look at maybe books by Runoko Rashidi. He is a scholar who really studied African history, and he became an ancestor last year. And one thing that he really went out of his way was to show how Africa went out into the rest of the world. And so he shows the African presence in the Americas. He shows the African presence in Asia. He shows the African presence in Africa, in China. And we actually see what an incredible impact that Africa has had on the rest of the world. And of course, Africa unrefutedly, by any science is the cradle of humanity, and Africa unrefutably by any science is the cradle of the cradle of life. And we've spoken about this in previous sessions about how if you come here, especially here in South Africa, interestingly enough, you might find Homo naledi, which is a predecessor to the humans as we know them today, or you might go to the Makonje Mountains, which is where the oldest known or preserved, aspects of photosynthesis or life or volcanic, sedimentation rock is found. So we definitely know, or we may speak of Lucy or, all sorts of firsts that come from the African continent, So I'd urge us all to, here in Black History Month, to read authors such as Runoko Rashidi so that we can understand what our impact is as Africans, even beyond the borders of our continent. And when we do this, we then start to understand the interconnectedness of all knowledges. So when I perhaps, defer to traditional Chinese medicine, I'm looking at it within the realms of the interconnectedness that it has with our indigenous African cosmologies. So I'm going to tackle the stomach briefly from a traditional Chinese medicine perspective, And when we go into traditional Chinese medicine, we realize that everything is patterned, in as much as I've said, our ancestors always tell us that everything is patterned. And so there are certain patterns that are associated, for instance, with the 5 elements, or the wuxing, as it is known. And each of these elements, it has a corresponding organ, which is whether it's a major organ or a minor organ, and it has all sorts of other and a corresponding element, corresponding numbers, corresponding planets, etc., etc. But let's just take the stomach. And within Chinese medicine, we never look at the stomach in and of itself. It always has a partnership, or any organ, especially the major organs, always have a partnership. And the partnership that the stomach has is with the spleen. And these two, the interaction between these two organs tells us a lot about chronic worry, about anxiety, about overthinking. It tells us about what we digest, not just in terms of how we digest food, but also what we digest in terms of our emotions and our thoughts. It tells us what we digest and keep in, which nurtures our spirits, or how we're able through this digestive system to let go of that which doesn't nurture our spirit. And because of this, we find that the stomach is associated with the element of earth. And there are 5 main elements, within traditional Chinese medicine. There's water, there's fire, there's metal, there's wood, and then there's earth. And the stomach specifically attributed to earth, with the color of yellow. And just like, our earth, our mother, just like her job is to nurture growth and all living creatures, the chi within the stomach, the ra, the ngum, the kundalini, as we call it, or the ngum, as we call it here in Southern Africa, the amandla, the umbilini, feeds all of the stomach, feeds all the organs enough power so that they can perform their jobs. So the stomach actually has a really important role, not just for digesting food, but in also how it grounds, it earths, and how it allows all other, organs to do their bit, So we can't speak about the stomach without speaking about the mouth, because the only route into the stomach, unless you have a peg, or is through the mouth. That is the everyday route to the stomach, or unless you unintentionally, inhale some liquid through your nostrils and it eventually ends up in them. So when we want to understand what's happening in the mouth, in the stomach, we also look at the mouth to understand what's happening. And from a traditional African perspective, not only are we looking at the mouth to see, perhaps whether you might have an ulcer, a mouth ulcer, or bleeding gums, but we're also looking at what is coming out of your mouth. What are you saying? What were your words? Because your words, as they're linked to the digestive system, are linked to whatever it is.
Yeah, keep going, Gogo. I think we lost you for a second there. Yeah, I think you must have muted yourself. This is Simon speaking. Thank you all for joining us for today's session of the Daily African Proverbs. My name is Simon Javan Okelo. I am in Seattle, Washington, and we've been, just receiving so much nuggets of wisdom from Gogo Rutendo Ngara. And she's joining me back here in a moment. And I want to encourage you to please ping in, 3 to 5 people to join us on Clubhouse. If you're on Clubhouse, if you're on YouTube, thank you for joining us. Remember to subscribe to the channel and also share this link with your community members. Thank you so much. Gogo, carry on, please.
Can you hear me?
Very well. Thank you so much.
Okay. Wonderful. No, so what I was saying is, from an indigenous African perspective, the stomach is not only linked to, what your mouth looks like in terms of your physiological or anatomical health, but it's also linked to what comes out of your mouth. What are your words? Because the state of your words also indicates the state of your stomach. So it's really important, to understand things, from that perspective. But we also have muscles that are attributed to the tissue that is connected with the stomach, So even the digestive process, even, when we swallow and, the esophagus, does its esophageal, function, in order to finally get, or, what we know as peristalsis, etc., in order to get, food eventually into our stomachs, there's a whole lot of muscles, that are associated with that, And if these are weak or undeveloped, or if you find that you're having cramps or tiring easily, it may mean that, from an overall perspective of how the stomach is related to earth, and everything, it may imply that you have a dysfunction, within your stomach or your spleen. And then within, 5-element theory, there's certain tastes, there are different types of tastes that are associated with the different elements, and therefore with the different organs. And the organ, the taste that is associated with the stomach is actually the sweet taste, And so if you find yourself craving craving sweets a lot, then you may find that your stomach actually needs support, and you may find that it might be that you have something like an emotional anxiety or an excessive worry, or something like that. If you're craving it in excess. But the stomach also likes warm things and not cold things, according to traditional Chinese medicine. So it's important that to have the full functioning, that you ensure that you're taking warm liquids as opposed to like taking ice cold, cold things. And finally, as we've said before, the stomach is associated with worry, with anxiety, with overthinking, and if you're overthinking, especially negative thoughts, you're constantly getting anxious, it may be that there's an imbalance in the stomach. And what we know is that if we have an excess in terms of what is happening in terms of these emotions, it can actually impact our gut health, our digestive health, because the digestive system, it doesn't only process the food, the physical food we eat, but it also processes the emotional food that we're eating. And of course, this may show up, as I said, in what you say as well. So your words are a symbol of what is happening within your stomach. But what we also know is that I'm moving away from Chinese medicine now and Western medicine, is that the stomach is sometimes seen as the second brain. Because it has, the second most neurons, associated with it, and so we notice that when you're anxious, what happens many a time, maybe in a minor anxiety, if you're just nervous about a job interview or coming to speak to Simon on Clubhouse, then, you might get butterflies in your stomach because it's registering, in that particular organ. But you may also find that if it's a bit extreme, then suddenly your stomach is not working so well and it wants to expel things with a lot of liquid, and so you may find that diarrhea sets in because it's processing at a neurological level as well what is happening within your emotions and what is happening within your mind and your intellectual faculties as well. So the stomach is doing a lot. It's doing a lot of digestion. And from an indigenous African perspective, as I've said, what is sitting in the stomach is a metaphor, or it is an extension of what is sitting in your whole being. And so what comes out, of your mouth impacts the stomach of somebody else through where? Through the ears. So the words that you say are really important because they're going to meet the ear of another person, and when they meet that ear, then they therefore go and they impact the stomach, once again, of that person, and then that may increase their anxiety, it may increase their worry, it may increase their overthinking. So we have to be temperate with our words. We have to be kind with our word. We have to have ma'at with our words because our words have the ability to impact, another, as we know. And this ear that we have, as we saw from those expressions, when I'm all ears, it means that there's just different ways of hearing that our indigenous knowledge systems acknowledge. But just once again, going, to from a traditional Chinese medicine perspective, we see that the ear is a complete microsystem, and we can actually see that on the external ear, the one that we can see here, there are actually acupuncture points that correspond to every single part of the body. Which means that within this ear is actually a self-contained system of treatment, within the whole body. And so how your health is not only determined by how the flow of your chi or your ra or your yin flows through your whole body, but also how it flows through your ears. as well, through the different pathways or rivers called meridians. And we also have meridian pathways in the ears. We also have rivers of energy that are flowing in the ears. And so if we stimulate certain points, within the ears, it communicates with the meridians to help clear up any blockages of your life force, of your chi, of your ra, or of your ngum, and therefore it can help to alleviate and any health conditions or prevent a variety of health issues, But now,
there's someone at the door. Keep going, and I'll be right back. So keep going.
Okay, not a problem.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So it's important, I think, that, we understand, that what comes from the stomach, has the potential to impact a whole microsystem in not only in themselves, in yourself, because what we say, which is sitting in the stomach, comes up. It also goes back, it feeds back into as a feedback loop into our own ears, but it also has the potential to feed back to, to a whole lot of other people. So, this then takes us into, now let's look at an African expression when it comes to the belly. I spoke of, Albert Einstein. I spoke of Alfred Nobel, rather. But here in Africa, there's a term that has been coined specifically in Cameroon by which was popularized by an author called Jean-Francois Bayat in Cameroon, which speaks about the politics of the belly. So when we come into Africa, we can also see the stomach as something that speaks to the political state of a country, or the political state of the continent. And specifically, the politics of the belly speaks or describes African political power in the post-colonial era. It speaks to the relationship between patrimonialism, between clientism, between corruption and power. So it speaks to a whole lot of the issues that we have seen in post-colonial Africa, post-slavery Africa, post-apartheid Africa. And it's the politics of the belly, it speaks to a distinctly African trajectory of power, that we really need to understand as a part of a long-term historical development. So we must never lose sight of the reality of our African politics and social life. We must allow the African voices, whether it is the small boys in the street or the big men in big positions, or whether it is the small girls and the big women, they must be allowed to speak for themselves. So this politics of the belly, it's almost a theoretical framework, which does not just look through the purely racial, or ethnic, or colonial, or evolutionary frameworks that people have used to understand, the politics of Africa, but it gives us a way of understanding the undercurrents which helped to shape African society, especially how societies are shaped by history. And as I said, this is Black History Month, so it's really important. So to understand hegemony, to understand governmentality, to understand extroversion, and when we understand the politics of the belly, we're really able to interpret political reality of the continent. So once again, the stomach, this thing, here in our beings, which digests, is also an expression of the politics, of our entire continent, so it is the politics of our 500 plus years of slavery. It is, the politics of, the impact of colonialism. And here in Africa, it is the politics that is impacted by apartheid. And therefore, what is the post-colonial Africa that we see today? And what is it that this politics of the belly brings about? And what we then see is another proverb that tells us that a deaf ear, so that's an ear that cannot hear, is followed by death, whereas an ear that listens is followed by blessings. So there is this relationship, within our African cosmology between the stomach and the ear. and it is a relationship of politics, of society, of education. It is a relationship that allows us to look at the interconnectedness, interrelatedness, and interdependence of all things. And so when I'm looking at this proverb, I'm seeing this proverb as speaking to Ubuntu that I've spoken about before. As it's a proverb that speaks to how we bring about Ubuntu. And of course, if we take the concept of Ubuntu, it's also known by many different terms and other, it might be known as Mat, as Maya in different African, languages. And of course, if we go to Kemet or ancient Egypt, it's known as Ma'at. It is the principle of interdependence, interconnectedness, interrelatedness, of divine law, of order, of holism, of systems, of generosity, of sharing, of wealth, of charity, or sacred economics, of synthesis. So when we understand that we have to keep our stomach in check, then that which comes out from the stomach, through the mouth, which is connected to the stomach and heeds the ears of the other, is able to bring about truth, is able to bring about justice, is able to bring about divine law, is able to bring about a beneficial economics, is able to bring about a beneficial high finance and political structures. It's able to bring about harmony, it's able to bring about order, and therefore charity and sharing. And of course, the reminder that we are not singular people, we are interconnected with the whole. And that whole includes people, persons, that whole includes non-people, non-beings, non-people beings, non-humans, so things. That interconnectedness is also with time, with space, and with modalities, even the modality of anxiety and fear and worry, excessive worry that you see associated with the stomach and the spleen. And when these are out of whack, or when these are out of harmony, then we see the kinds of behaviors we see, which is maybe extravagance and greed and excess and unlawfulness, and antagonism that brings about the major conflicts that we see in our countries today, including the country where this proverb comes from, including Sudan as we know it. So when we say, empty stomachs have no ears, we look at this relationship between the stomach and, the ear, and we look at it also in terms of one of the great ills we find on our continent, which is that of poverty, So what happens when the stomach doesn't actually have something it can say because it is steeped in a poverty that is brought about because of an inability to live according to the principles of Ma'at, or the principles of Ubuntu at a governance level, or even at a community level, or even at a family level, or on an individual level. So we're really looking into this, because once you have that empty stomach, then you cannot be all ears. You cannot hear. You cannot hear. There cannot be music in your ears. All those terms. You can't play it by ear. Anymore. You can't make a plan, because the only plan, even the survival that you're seeking for, is hampered by your inability to function physiologically, due to the absence of adequate nutrition, or whatever it is that is fed into your stomach, or through what it is that is being fed into your stomach, in terms of what you're digesting, in terms of what is being said about your race, what is being said about your gender, what is being said about your tribe, what is being said, about everything that eventually impacts and becomes conflict as we know it. So for me, this is a proverb that tells us to go right back to the principles of Ubuntu. It's a proverb that tells us to go right back to the principles of Ma'at, and it asks us, how do we fill each other's stomachs? And when we fill each other's stomachs, then we all can have ears, and therefore we can come into a common understanding and a common knowing and a common hearing. And once we have a common hearing, then we have a common acknowledging, and therefore we can be all ears and then one in resonance.
Thank you so much, Gogo. I'm so grateful. I just learned so much about, the stomach and the ears, and how it's connected not just to our entire body, but the entire world, and our entire being. And also, the connection between the stomach and the earth was very fascinating to me. And then the understanding of, the stomach from the Chinese medicine perspective was also very, very, fascinating for me to learn about. Thank you. I do want to ask you to share with us, what Credo Mutua would say about this proverb. But while you prepare to share that with us, I want to, just let everybody know that at 6:30 a.m. we turn off hand raising. And so those who are on stage will be able to share with us their perspectives in a moment. But today we are very privileged. We are hosting Gogo Rutendo Ngara, who is a well-known spiritual leader based in South Africa. And, she has been sharing with us a lot. So if you missed any portion of this conversation, don't worry. We are going to have it recorded on YouTube. You can actually catch both Gogo Rutendo and I right now on YouTube. We are live over there. And also later on, you can catch this conversation in the African Father in America podcast across all podcasting platforms. And, I want to invite you to ping in 3 to 5 people to join us for today's conversation. And now I want to, continue on with the conversation, Gogo. Every week when we gather, especially when we have you here on Thursdays, we also look into what would Credo Mutua, say about these proverbs. And I just want you just quickly share with us who Credo Mutua is, so that those who are joining us for the first time can learn a little bit. And then maybe if you have an excerpt from one of his books that you want to read that is aligned with this proverb, we would really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So, Africa has seen many incredible sages, many incredible mages. It has seen polymaths, who have really contributed to where the world is today. And as I've said, I'd really encourage, people to read, Runoko Rashidi and other such authors in order to understand what the great contribution of Africa has been to the world, in our Black history. Credo Mutua is one such. He was known as a Sanusi. He was known as a high initiate. He was a polymath. He was a master of so many disciplines, whether it was in the arts or whether he was able to be an advisor at a scholarly level in the arts and music, in art, in philosophy, in astronomy. He was a prophet as well. There were so many things that we attribute to this great man. And he passed away almost 2 years ago into the realms of the great ancestors. But he's left so much in terms of his legacy for us to keep drawing on. And today, I'd just like to read an excerpt from one of his books, and it's indirectly associated with the proverb, and I'll explain how, for me, it is associated with the proverb. So here he's talking about his journey in training as a healer, and I read some of that story last week. But so here he says, that night, a storm of visions and dreams descended upon me. First, I dreamt that I was walking along a grassy plain in a land I could not identify. The land certainly was not African because the trees were tall, very tall, like pine trees. And out of nowhere, 4 ferocious leopards suddenly emerged and began chasing me. At first, I ran, trying to escape the mighty beasts, but I suddenly lost my strength even to walk. I found myself crawling on my knees. One of the animals, a great golden beast, appeared before me with its eyes burning into mine. It came at me and seized my throat, and blood gushed out of my mouth. The other beasts closed in. I felt my body being torn apart. I felt the beast dragging my mutilated body in all directions. I screamed, and suddenly I was sewn back together again like a rag doll. The 4 leopards were still hungry, spotted monsters with burning eyes, but they were no longer devouring me. Instead, they heeded me like a goat, or they herded me like a goat in a particular direction. They took me to a side of a mountain where there was a black hole. The leopards butted me like a goat, forcing me to jump into the hole. Inside the hole was a gigantic woman. She was big and she was lying on her left side. She called and invited me to drink milk from her enormous breasts like a little calf. I remember that she pushed her breast into my mouth, and I felt the huge nipple between my lips and tasted the warm, nourishing milk. I felt like a baby again. I felt protected. I felt loved. I felt cherished. You must be strong, said the giant woman. The load that you're going to bear is very great. And then she stood up. She was huge and naked without a single piece of animal skin. She wore no beads, she wore nothing. She was big like a mountain. She simply said, "Follow me." In my dream, I meekly followed her. The movement of her vast buttocks mesmerized me, and the way her thighs rubbed against together was paralyzing. And then she stood aside and ordered me to go into a tunnel-like cavern. "Go with courage," she said. As I walked through the dark tunnel, a big dog suddenly came straight at me out of the darkness. She said to me, "Do not be afraid. If you fear, you shall perish. If you show courage, you shall survive." This dog pulled me into a huge cabin where I saw many campfires. The cabin was like no other cave I'd ever seen in my life. Inside were hundreds of old men and women. A group of them called me to their fireside and told me things I did not understand. Though I knew what they were saying in my dream, when I woke up, I forgot every single word of what was said. I woke up drenched in sweat as the vision was so vivid and overpowering. A few days later, the dream returned. There were no leopards this time, or hungry beasts with burning eyes of liquid gold. Only the gigantic woman who smelled of sweat and womanly scent was there. She was bleeding, and I could see the blood coming from under her stomach. She was sitting in a puddle of blood. I was shocked. I had heard about women menstruating, but had never seen anything like this. The woman said, "Come to me. Come, my boy. Come, kneel down before me." And, then she took me into her huge cavern. This time, angry warriors seized me and threw me onto a flat stone. One of them drove a knife made of stone into my chest. I felt intense pain and immediately became weaker and weaker. A voice speaking in classical Zulu spoke, "In death there is rebirth. In rebirth there's a death a second time. That which goes away shall come back, and that which arrives shall go away." When I finally came to life in the dream, I was still lying on the rock, but now I was young, I was healthy, I was virile, and I was without a trace of sickness. All around me, spheres like soap bubbles floated around the cavern. They bounced and floated around like living beings, unlike ordinary soap. And inside the sphere were two things, which looked to be snakes, one dark red and the other dark blue, which twisted and fought, writhing about as if locked in mortal combat. Some of the spheres, which had long wings like a gigantic dragonfly, floated around above and under the other sphere as a breathtaking display of flying. After I woke, I told Mina was his trainer, about these things, and she said these were the souls of the dead, and that inside each soul are two worms, a red and a black and a blue worm, and they're always in conflict with each other. She told me that the red worm represented evil, that is all the vices and weaknesses of a person, and the dark blue worm represented all the good, all the virtues and strengths of the person. Every soul must have both good and evil, the blue worm and the red worm. Without a perfect balance, the soul would die. If, for instance, a man should only be good, he would have no reason to exist. If we're only bad, he would automatically be destroyed. Overly good people never live long. The two worms are always quarreling inside each soul, and if one worm seriously damages the other, the soul becomes unbalanced and can no longer survive in the world, because survive requires a perfect balance between good and evil. And I was told that the souls with the long wings were the souls of people who had undergone 28 rebirths. They had reached a state of perfection, and they no longer had to reincarnate into any physical form. Instead, they rose up into the high planes of existence to become part of the substance of the fearsome being which you humans call God. I learned that each human has two souls. The great soul, the Moya, is the sphere with the worms fighting inside. There is also a little soul, the inner, which develops as the human being grows from childhood into old age and death. And whereas the inner, which only starts to come into being as a person is being born, is sometimes seen as the ghost of a dead person, the Moya comes through all the incarnations from a human being to an animal to a reptile to a bird to a rock to a tree to a fish and ultimately to a star. And the inner of our ancestors must be fed in order there for them to stay alive. And so here, Baba Credo is talking not just in terms of what exists, that fight that exists within our stomachs, which is the fight between the blue worm and the red worm, which is the eternal conflict that determines the trajectory of our soul, but that we also need to feed the stomachs of our ancestors in order to keep them alive within us. And when we keep them alive within us, then we have that perfect balance of ma'at between those that have come before, those who are present now, and those who are in the future. So our stomachs and our ears have a consequence in all realms, the past, the present, and the future.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. Thank you so much for picking that incredible piece to align with today's proverb, and also to bring Credo Mutua's spirit and wisdom into today's conversation. And now I want to just open the space to hear from Crystal. Crystal, by the way, I really love that you changed your first name to Kikuyu. I'm curious about why. And also Tess and Gabe and Jiba, I would love to hear your perspectives. Just briefly, when you have your chance, Crystal, please just say where you're joining us from. What are your thoughts in regards to today's proverb, and also what Gogo Rutendo Ngara has shared with us today. And then once we hear from all of you, we'll come back to Gogo, who is going to provide just a closing remark and also a summary of what she has heard from you all. But before you do that, I want to invite you who are on YouTube. First of all, I want to thank you, Aduo, Sister Aduo, for being there with us. I see that Bibi is also there with us now. Thank you so much. If you're joining me on YouTube for the first time, remember to subscribe to the channel, and also push the thumbs up button so that when we are live next time, YouTube can notify you. And my goal is to get to 2,000 subscribers by the end of February. And I see that you're all putting in a lot of work together with me to get me to that goal. I truly appreciate it. But if you're on Clubhouse, please remember to ping in 3 to 5 people to join us for the last segment of today's conversation. Crystal, I'll pass you the microphone.
Hi, yes, good morning. Good morning to the room. I am joining from Atlanta, Georgia, and I changed my name to Kikuyu Crystal because I didn't want my first and last name on this app. I've just encountered people who are very invested in other people's lives, and so I just taking heed to some of the things that I've seen online or on this app. I changed it so in with homage to my father, who is from the Kikuyu tribe. I'm first generation American, but he he uh, he moved to Miami and met my mom. So there's that. As far as the as thank you so much, Gogo, for what you shared. Um, and speaking to these relationships that our mental state has with our digestive health. And it just affirms, even though I didn't understand how synchronistic it was, it just affirms that we are bodies of consciousness inside of bodies of consciousness inside of bodies of consciousness. And it is all this pattern that you speak of, even down to like a cellular level. There is communication that is happening with our cells. They have a function. They are functioning conscious entities, these cells within our bodies. And I think of it, I don't know if I'm from the States, but I don't know if anyone in the room has seen the movie Osmosis Jones. It's a cartoon based on like cells in the body and bacteria. And it's a cartoon, and it's a children's movie, but I think that does speak to, there's a lot of truth into the ways that um, our the cells in our bodies, and like being outside contact, viruses may come in, and how this communication happens, taking over a whole cell, or just other things like that. So yeah, I definitely enjoyed your reading and your share. Now, as far as the proverb, empty stomachs have no ears, I definitely immediately thought of a socioeconomic status. I think about how we vilify the poor. They are at the bottom of everything, often invisibilized. And in a capitalist society, especially in the United States, there will be every alternative, whether that is to put you on medication, institutionalize you, through mentally institutionalize you, or even within our prison industrial complex, we have this like we have this we never consider someone's socioeconomic status, and we don't try to do care work around making sure people are self-sustaining. Why would we do that? That actually affects the bottom line of our of the way that the system operates. It's designed to be this way, because in order for there to be rich, there has to be a poorer, a poverty, an exploited class. So empty stomachs have no ears just makes me like we're ignoring the obvious to play and perform in this system. I think of when we're addressing depression. Well, we're very quick to put you on medication, but how about like a full service? Like, are all of your hormone levels, like how does that look? Like, we're not factoring health. We're not factoring in, well, does this person have everything that they need to support themselves, in a society where it's like, everything is based on what you have materially. And when you can't meet that societal standard, that does affect your mental health and the quality of life that you can afford. We don't consider things like this. It's much more easier to put someone on a medication, and not to say that medication isn't necessary in some cases, but um, I just feel like there should be a progressive um, management of how we like this should be approached with tact, and we jump to pharmaceuticals because that's also a very booming industry that keeps our country, thriving, or this country thriving. I will say, uh, it's easier to blame crime on people who don't have resources to advocate for themselves. It's easier to blame every bad thing that's wrong with the United States on the poor. Um, and yeah, I feel like we invisibilize and dehumanize people who are living in poverty, and we excuse the greed of those who are actually empowered to make the changes. And that is my share. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you, Kikuyu. You're amazing. I'm just grateful that you're here. Thank you for your contribution. And Tess, how are you doing? And where are you joining us from today? I hope everything is all right. Share with us your perspectives on today's proverb and any comments on Gogo Rutendo's time with us today.
Thank you so much, Simon, and greetings. Peace to the room. Peace to everybody who's listening in. So when Gogo Rutendo was reading the book by Credo Mutwa, the one thing that literally jumped at me was, I think, and I could be paraphrasing, overly good souls don't live long. Oof, how true is that? And, just the emphasis on a balanced soul and also the fact that there's more than one soul. Now that got me curious. And I do need to look into that book. I'm doing well. And there's also something else that she mentioned about we have more than one brain. Yes, we do have three brains, the brain that you have in your head, the brain that you have in your heart, and the gut brain. So interestingly enough, 90% of the body's serotonin actually comes from the gut cells, this T sanguinis. And, serotonin is very important in our bodies, literally, because it's what regulates your mood, what regulates your health, what regulates your sleep patterns. And, when you are not calm or focused or stable or grounded, pretty much you're hangry, you're angry and hungry at the same time. And when your serotonin levels in the body actually low, you suffer from anxiety and depression. And when you have those two together, you're perpetually living in the state of survival mode, the fight, flight, freeze. And when you're in that mode, most of the things around you don't really matter because you're literally fighting to survive. And it's interesting that the proverb actually links the stomach to the ears, because in the ears we have melanocytes, and melanocytes are very crucial to what you hear, how you hear, and even your hearing itself. And, melanocytes are connected to melanin. And so connecting the gut to the ear is very important, because you know how they always say you are what you eat. I usually rephrase it and say you are what you digest, because for you to produce healthy melanocytes or melanin cells in the inner ear, which are responsible for hearing and what you're actually hearing, you have to be able to have a healthy microbiome, eat a lot of foods rich in vitamin C, vitamin A, vitamin B12, like your berries and the green leafy vegetables. And that will help you produce more melanocytes in the inner ear. And then your hearing will be better, and even the quality of what you're hearing. And so if you have healthy microbiome, you have good melanocytes, you do have healthy serotonin levels in your body, you're stable, you're grounded, then you can actually be able to hear and understand from a place of groundedness and calm, as opposed to a hypersensitive place whereby you're in survival mode or crisis mode all the time. So I think there's a lot of wisdom, like heavy wisdom, because this is like scientific stuff that I learned throughout the years. And here are our ancestors telling us that empty stomachs have no ears. They were absolutely right. My name is Tess, and I am done speaking. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tess, for even bringing this to a place where it's even more clearer. So thank you again for your for your wisdom and for your contribution today. For those who are just joining us, we are coming towards the tail end of the daily African Proverbs. We are live on YouTube with Gogo Rutendo Ngara, who is our special guest every Thursday. And Gogo, thank you again for making the time. I know how busy you are, and just creating the time for this weekly session this is how to change the world, because as you are saying earlier, what you say is determined by, with what is in your gut, with what is in your stomach. So everything you always say to us here also feeds us. So thank you so much. But now we are also going to Liberia. Our next speaker is our brother Jiba. Jiba, share with us where you are and, your perspectives on this proverb and any comments on Gogo Rutendo Ngara's conversation with us today.
Thank you, Brother Simon. Good morning, everyone. It's been a while, but it was amazing hearing your voice again and your amazing contribution. And of course, to our special guest, Gogo. Wow, I learned so much today about my ears than I ever did. So thank you for, the awareness. And but I am pretty much, I pretty much like the way Gogo was able to tie the ears, stomach, to both the biological explanation as well as the political implication of those problems. And just because of, where I'm from, Liberia, as well as Africa, my continent, ears, stomach, or a hunger stomach, or an empty belly has always been a driving force for politicians to, use and abuse. And oftentimes, I know for sure, growing up in Liberia, we always say politicians, often use that to their advantage. The Liberians, we love rice, so usually the politician would never see, go to the people or meet the villagers until when there's the election. And all they do, pack pickups or trucks full of bags of rice and dump it on the people and get their vote, they're gone. Now, for us who are conscientized to talk to the people about these things, that you need to vote not just for your stomach, you need to vote for your future, your children's future. But the first thing they often remind us, what? A beggar has no choice. Whatever comes to them is what they hope. They're like, what we going to eat in order to stay alive to build our children's future? So hunger is really a bad thing. It affects the ear because they don't hear anything else you tell them because they're hungry. So they want to focus on the now. And that's what hunger does to you. You don't hear anything about the future. You focus more on the now. So, it's an amazing proverb, and I like how it ties into the politics of today and Africa as a whole. And of course, the Europeans, Americans have used that to their advantage, But that's my share so far. But I really love the room, man. Thanks for this topics for today.
You're most welcome, Jiba. And Bibi is sharing a few comments here with us on YouTube. I want to just read them quickly. Bibi says, Bibi Wiley, for those who are meeting Bibi for the first time, empty stomachs may not have ears, but they hear or feel the loudest. I went 7 days without food and only drank water. Within just those days, my body told me what I needed to know. She goes further and says, our ancestors were wise and very attentive. I learned so much about the gut, spirituality, and the body after my accident. It seems connected. And also just to make a quick comment, on what Gogo was saying, that the politics of stomach, the politics of the stomach, and what Jiba was saying about how Liberian politicians use rice. In Kenya they use maize flour, and in fact, there are some politicians who are very famous for buying maize from all the silos in Kenya, like 2 years before the election, and then they just go and hide it. They buy it from the government silos and hide it. Then 6 months to the election, you're being asked for your vote, but you're also being given a pack of maize flour. So at the same time, even 10 decades ago, they would even take your voting card. You take the maize flour, they take your voting card, they take your rights away, they take your life away. And recently, with the Tigray genocide going on, I was, involved with interviewing a professor from the Tigray region, who is a professor, a distinguished professor here in the US, who has done extensive research, on cancer. And he was just speaking of how his own parents, who are in Tigray, were eating leaves and just shrubs because they are being starved. As we speak, there are people around Africa who are facing deliberate starvation because of their political, affiliation. So these are realities that our ancestors saw from long time ago. And if any one of you is listening or watching this becomes a politician or a leader, don't be one of those people who, who make others suffer just because of food. With that, I want to come back to you, dear Gogo. Just wrap it all up for us and share with us, some of your closing remarks based on what you heard, and also share with us, anything that I didn't ask you today.
Thank you so much, Simon. And thank you so much for all the incredible contributions from, the brothers and sisters on the floor. And I think, a key point that I'm hearing coming out is, how the biological is political, but the biological is also economic, and the biological is spiritual. This, and that's, the basic tenet of Ma'at or Ubuntu. Everything is interconnected, interrelated, and interdependent. And, and I loved what, Tess, Sister Tess said about, you need to have a healthy, microbiome in order, that, impacts upon good melanocytes in the ear, which produces healthy serotonin, and then you're able to hear from a healthy, balanced state and not simply in survival mode. And when you're able to hear from that healthy, balanced state, then you're maybe able to make the socio-political decisions, whether it is in your own inner socio-economic decisions within your own homestead, or whether you're able to make them at a more macro level. And so what we see is that actually food was used as a tool, as a weapon of war, not only in current day politics, as you've mentioned it, but also by the colonialists as well. And when you speak about maize, within the country that I come from, it was completely denatured from its indigenous form into a form that that just makes you full. It makes you full, but it doesn't give you any nourishment because it's completely denatured. And then everybody believes that it's an indigenous food, and actually maize is not indigenous to Africa, at all. And there's been this brainwashing, and we can go into the whole discussion about the politics of food and how it was used as a colonial tool, to disempower, and therefore bring us into what Crystal spoke about, about the poverty, how it impacted on the poverty, and therefore the invisibilizing, the dehumanizing of those who then give a reason for the status quo to continue its place. So food contributes to Africa being in a collective survival mode state, which is why it is so important to have our agricultural systems restored, in such a way that we're able to eat in the healthiest manner. So it's firstly, there's the level of those who just don't have food in their stomachs because they're empty, but then those who have food in their stomachs, but it's not necessarily food that's leading towards their highest intellectual, their highest economic, their highest emotional, heart-based, soul-based, or spiritual-based, realities. But then also just what Sister Bibi said about empty stomachs, not having ears, but also being able to hear the loudest. And we know that there's a great, there's great benefit that comes into planned fasting. Because it's not healthy to just be constantly in an eating state, and the world is becoming more and more obese as we know it, because we've lost the cycles of eating, the cycles of how we feed the stomach, empty the stomach, leave the stomach so that it can do other things, such as Sister Bibi has said, giving us information about the greater state of things, in that fasted state. So then we're stuck with all sorts of things like eating disorders, etc. instead of, clearly understanding how the cycles of the body work, and, how when the cycles of the body work in an indigenous paradigm, how we eat indigenously, how we eat locally, how we eat in season, all of these things, contribute towards our social, our ability to impact society, and our ability to impact, economically as well. So everything is interrelated, interconnected, and interdependent. And I know you wanted to ask me if I have something from childhood that's related to this proverb. And when my mother, wanted to make a statement about us, if we thought we were full of it, full of it, pompous, know-it-alls, as sometimes we can get when you're young, or precocious. She would twist, the ear, in order to get the point, and she'd call us a tsibinki, in Sesotho, which is one, kind of a know-it-all. But in that process of twisting the ear in that particular way, she was actually massaging certain meridian points, that would impact, the body in a particular way in order to regulate, our behavior in such a way that we're able to be more mindful in our behavior. So, I mean, there are all these things that our parents did, our grandparents did, that we thought, oh my God, why were they doing that? But there's actually a logic and an eternal logic, behind it, which they didn't speak of because the code was known, and we have unfortunately forgotten the code in this day and age, and so we're in a process of remembering.
I love that. I'm just so grateful that you're able to share that, because I can relate. I remember those days when we got our ears, twisted a little bit, and then we had ngoto. For those who grew up in Kenya, we have ngoto, which was, a little knock on your head. Anyhow, this has been a great conversation, Gogo. Thank you so much. But I do want you to share again how people can support your amazing work. Yesterday I was privileged to be on a Zoom call with Gogo and Lita, who is supporting Gogo and, walking the talk together with Gogo. So I want you to just speak a little bit about some of the wonderful work you're doing, so that, everyone who is watching and listening can also reach out and see how they can support you.
It's amazing just how the universe works. And I spoke about how the universe is inherently patterned. And yesterday was a full moon day. And that full moon was the full moon in Kemetic cosmology, which is the cosmology that I follow, or Sarian cosmology, of Heru. And Heru is the leader. Heru is the one who understands how to live according to the laws of Ma'at. It's our higher hero, it's the archetype through which all superheroes are formed. And interestingly enough, on that particular day, yesterday, one of our great First Nations elders, our Batwa elders, Abarwa elders in Namibia, who is known as the last line shaman of the Kalahari, passed on to the world of the ancestors. And so, he represented, like Credo Mutwa, a lot of the indigenous knowledge that we seek to preserve and conserve and protect, especially because so much of these knowledges are being lost, and, which show us just a wealth of what we know in terms of what we can use to solve some of the great wicked problems of today, the intractable problems, that we have today. And so part of our work is in supporting, elders such as Gubi, who just passed on to the world of the ancestors, supporting their communities, the communities that are custodians of this dying knowledges. And, for them, the First Nations peoples, they're dying out. They're literally pre-extinction, as we know it, and yet they're holders of such incredible wisdom and knowledge. And so many of our projects that we work with, whether it is with the indigenous custodians of sacred sites, of sacred knowledges, of deep science, as well, because our indigenous science is a science. It's a science. There's absolute science and logic in the indigenous knowledges, is what we do through various mediums, as I said, from a non-profit side in terms of supporting communities, sites and custodians, and then also the protection of the wisdom, also propagating Credo Mutu's legacy, because there's so much that was inherent in his legacy. And then, of course, bringing ancient wisdom or indigenous knowledge to the world in a way that is accessible, that is tangible, that is embodied in such a way that it facilitates, a critical mass that is able to impact the future and make a better world for us all.
Thank you so much. You said, very important, stuff, but you didn't say how people can support you.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can support us through, obviously, through some of the work, the nonprofit work we do, is the social work that we do through the Credo Mutu Foundation, or through Ancient Wisdom Foundation. Which we can find them on the website, Credo Mutu Foundation and the Ancient Wisdom Foundation. And if they contact us, we can have conversations even into kind of what complementary projects are out there, because we really believe in working in co-laboratories and a collaboration, and working, we take it that in an unbounded way, and we take it that ultimately the whole is bigger than the sum of the individual parts.
It's true. Thank you for your humility, and thank you for all the work that you're doing. And to our viewers on YouTube, thank you so much. Remember to subscribe to the channel, and thank you for everyone that has already been supporting the YouTube channel specifically. It means a lot. I've been seeing the comments from you, Sister Adua, and many other amazing brothers and sisters from across the world. And Clubhouse has also been an amazing platform where, without these platforms, it would have been hard for me to bring Gogo Rutendo Ngara, and even for me to be exposed to this level of depth when it comes to African wisdom. So because of these platforms, I would say I'm one of the biggest beneficiaries, of your work. So thank you. And we will see you tomorrow. I also want to let you know that next week I'm taking a break. The whole week I will not be doing the daily African Proverbs, but we will be sharing, we are starting a blog on my website. It's called Raise Your Consciousness blog, where we are going to be writing. I have a community of writers who are going to be taking the previous episodes and turning them into amazing blogs. So stay tuned, and you can actually subscribe to the blog. If you go to my link tree or through my Instagram or Twitter, you can subscribe to the blog today. That way you can support me, and you can also support the community of writers who are putting in the work even as we speak. So thank you again, and Gogo, have a beautiful evening.
Thank you so much.
African father in America. Tujikaze, tujikaze, jikaze. Tujikaze, tujikaze, jikaze. African father in America. Tujikaze, tujikaze, jikaze. You are listening to African Father in America podcast by Simon Jalvano Kelo, live from Seattle.